Good morning. We are learning Parshas Vayeshev, Chelek Chaf Hey, the Vayeshev Yutes Kislev Sicha. Yodim divrei hashla b'parshasenu, shekol moedei hashana kashurim b'inyaneihem leparshios haTorah hanikros bizmanim shebahem chalim moedim elu, v'ubichlal ze af hamodim shetukno zman rav la'achar shniaso haparshios. So it is well known, the teaching of the Shla, Rav Yeshaya Horowitz, on our Parsha, that all holidays throughout the year are connected to the Parshas in which they fall out during. And even if this holiday took place many years after the Parsha took place. This statement was originally made regarding Hanukkah, but it's a true statement for all holidays. Ve'im kan muvan b'nogea l'mayad Yutes Kislev, asher chal b'shana zo v'rov hashanim b'shavua shel Parshas Vayeshev. So according to this, so too it would be true for Yutes Kislev, that falls out in all years, in many years, including this year, on Parshas Vayeshev. She'techono shel yom zeh ze kashur leParshas Vayeshev v'meraz ba. That the idea, the content of Yutes Kislev is connected to Parshas Vayeshev and hinted to in the Parsha as well. Ach b'hashkafa rishayna, lozo bilvad she'ein anurim kesher bein toichan haparsha le'inyan Yutes Kislev. Ela adarabba, lichayra haparsha osekes b'toichan hafi mituchan Yutes Kislev. So at first glance, there doesn't seem to be any connection, or it doesn't seem to be an obvious connection between Yutes Kislev and the Parsha. And even on the contrary, it seems to actually be talking about opposite concepts. Yutes Kislev hi hayom asher chufsha netinas lo l'Rebbeinu hazaken. So Yutes Kislev is the day that freedom was given to the Alter Rebbe. V'zehu yom ha'geula shel Torah Chasidus ki yodea u'meforsam. And this is the day of geula for Torah Chasidus, liberation of the study of Chasidus as well, and is well known. L'uma zeh, on the other hand, beParshas Vayeshev medubar al tchilas sibas yiridas Yisrael Mitzrayim. Vayeshev seems to be talking about the opposite. It's giving us the reasons and the beginning of our descent, Yeridas, of Israel into Mitzrayim. Hachel b'shlichuso shel Yosef al yedei Yaakov Avinu me'emek Chevron. And this began with Yosef being sent down to Mitzrayim. V'kol hamoros shebehemshech lezeh v'ad lemechiras Yosef v'haradas l'Mitzrayim. And all the details that are part of that story until he is sold in slavery in Mitzrayim. Asher hovilu lekach shehorid la'aviv Yaakov leMitzrayim cholo. And what did this lead to? Yosef going down led to his own father Yaakov also going down to Mitzrayim. Belashon haMedrash in the Medrash, v'sham huva al kach mashal. They bring an analogy, a mashal. Lepara shehayu moshchin otal lemekoilin v'lo he'ata nimsheches. A cow that is being pulled to the slaughterhouse and it doesn't want to go. Ma'asula, so what do? Mashku espana lifneha. They put the baby cow in front of the mother cow, the older cow. V'hayita mehaleches acharav al korcha shelo bituvasa. And this mother cow that's being drawn to the slaughterhouse is compelled to follow the baby cow against its will. And so too it was as if Yaakov was drawn down to Mitzrayim in chains and shackles. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, B'ni b'chayri, v'ani morid b'bizayon. And Hashem says to him, my son, my firstborn, am I bringing you down with a disgrace in a disgraceful manner? Hulo ella hareini moshech espeno lefanav. But rather, I'm going to send your son first. V'hu yored acharav al korcho shelo betuvaso. And you're going to go down against your will, even though it's not really good for you. So I didn't see this explicitly written in the Medrash, but what I understand is happening here, that Yaakov doesn't go to Mitzrayim needy for food. Instead, he goes as a father who's concerned for his son. But again, that's just my own understanding. But this is the way that Hashem brings Yaakov down to Mitzrayim. Seif bet. V'yesh levayer es hakesher v'hashaychos b'neihem al pi hayadua shegalus Mitzrayim lo ba b'tur einash. So let's understand this according to the concept that the Galus Mitzrayim was actually not a punishment. Ela lehepech actually was the opposite. Tchilas hayita v'acharechen yotzu b'rechush gadol. Ultimately, the Jewish people and the purpose of going down to Mitzrayim was that they would leave with great wealth, rechush gadol, kipshuto, begashmias v'ken baruchnias, physically and spiritually as well. Galus Mitzrayim hechinet Yisrael likras behotzet et ha'am begomer betavdunas Elokim al hahar hazel lios re'uim lekabel es Torah b'matan Torah. So the Galus Mitzrayim was a preparation for them to be taken out and ultimately to receive the Torah on Har Sinai. Inyan zeh שהגלס אינה בפני עצמו, אלא כוונת ובנתרסו של הגאולה, כי העילוי הבא באמצעות הגאולה, מן הגלס, מודגש בגאולי אצל יוסף. So this concept that the gullus of going down to Mitzrayim was not a thing into itself, was not its own idea, but rather it was for the purpose of geula to be drawn out from the gullus. We see this very clearly in the life of Yosef. Gam lefi hamesupar b'pshuto shel mikra. According to the contextual, the literal understanding of the verses, Mechiras Yosef v'yiridaso lemitzrayim nigarmu be'inyanei basar al yedei kavanat habilti ritzui shel ach Yosef. So the selling of Yosef and his going down to Mitzrayim was caused very clearly, just basic, like according to just a basic look from our eyes, the negative intentions of the brothers of Yosef. But after the fact, after all that happened, it became obvious what the purpose was. So that's a quote from Parshas Vayigash, which I thought maybe we'll just take a quick look at that inside. If we look at the psukim over here, starting from Hey, but now Yosef is saying to his brothers, but now do not be sad and let it not trouble you that you sold me here, for it was to preserve life that God sent me before you. For already 2 years of famine have passed in the midst of the land, and for another 5 years it will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to make for you a remnant in the land and to preserve it for you for a great deliverance. And now you did not send me here, but God, he made me a father to Paro, a lord over all his household and a ruler over the entire land of Egypt. So Yosef is very clearly sharing that it's not you, Hashem sent me here, and he sent me here with a purpose. And it's quoted in the Medrash, the same Medrash that we spoke about with the cow. But Yosef Hored Mitzrayma Kivshon Heichma Das Amar Vered Miyam Ad Yam Shalet Bahon Ha'echma De'et Amar Ki Hu Rodeh Bekol Avar Hanahar. And when it says Yosef was brought down to Mitzrayim, Hored Mitzrayma, it's like a furnace. But also, sorry, not furnace, Kivshon to conquer. As it says in Tehillim, that he ruled from sea to sea. And it uses the word rodeh in Tehillim to show us that, as is understood to mean to ruled. So on one hand, rodeh, hored, hurad is the root that means to go down, but it's also the word that means to rule. And I wanted to show the verse in Tehillim, but I didn't prepare it up front. So can I just do that now on the call and just do that?
What was the second meaning of Yored?
To rule, but I wanted to just show you the verse in Tehillim.
Thanks. Okay.
It's Tehillim Ayin Beis Ches. I should have opened a tab before the class, but you'll forgive me. And we hear, and he may reign from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the land. And it says the first word, Vayered, and he may reign. So reign to rule. So the same word that means brought down, descend, also means rule. Shalton Yosef Kivshon hu rodeh. So Yosef is the ruler. Kivshon means to conquer, and it means a ruler. Nilmad mehalashon hored mitzrayma. So this is learned from the phrase hored mitzrayma, that we understood it literally, or we understand it's not a literal versus not literal, but we understood it to mean go down to Mitzrayim, but it could also mean to rule Mitzrayim. Hainu shekavanot v'materes horada haita sheyosef yeh kovesh v'shalit. And this is to say, this means that the purpose and the intention of the descent into Mitzrayim was that he should conquer and he should rule. Hamishana lemelech mitzrayim, he would be second to the king of Mitzrayim. V'milado lo yarim ish es yado v'es raglo. And without him, nobody is going to raise a hand or a foot, which is a quote from the pasuk, in Mitzrayim without Yosef's consent. And this concept, this idea, this of Yosef going to Mitzrayim as a ruler, relates directly to Chag HaGeula, to Yud Tes Kislev. So the imprisonment of the Alter Rebbe was not an occurrence, an event in and of itself, but and then afterwards he gets freed. But rather the geula, the freedom, was the purpose of the imprisonment itself. So this is very interesting. And as the Rebbe Rashab, even though it was difficult for him to say said, I thought that was just interesting, because sometimes sorry, I'm just going to give a little commentary. Sometimes you see something bad happen and you're like, okay, but that's for this reason. But here the Rebbe Rashab it's difficult for him to say this. But this is what he said. B'kol zo kachu hadavar shegilui hayta la'achar Peterburg, la'achar hamaisa haya al derech maimar hazal hazayit shekochin oto motzi shemano. So that all of this was for the purpose that the Alter Rebbe should get to the level of after Petersburg, which we'll discuss in a minute, like after the imprisonment, when his teachings become expounded in a more accessible and a greater way. And all of this was according to the statement of the rabbis that to get the purest oil from the olive, you have to squeeze it the hardest. Meaning that the imprisonment brought out this higher level of the Alter Rebbe's teaching and spreading of Hasidus, which was referred to as the stage of after Petersburg. And this is similar to squeezing an olive very, very hard to get out the best oil. V'mimashal ze muvan hanimshal shekoshtin oto lo ba melachatchila ela kadei sheyamotzi shemano ukehemshech divrei admar nishmas eden. Okay, and all of this in the analog is that the squeezing in the first place, the squeezing of the olive is not for the sake of squeezing the olive, but it's for getting out the oil. And as the Rebbe Rashad continued, katrugim shayu bePetersburg nisgala hapnimius dafka chulo beikar hakavana haya begilui hapnimius dafka. So too, the difficulties and the challenges of Petersburg, they revealed the pnimius, the inner level specifically, and this was the purpose of that the pnimius itself, the deepest levels of Torah should be revealed. And there's a little footnote 25 to just a geschmack of statement from Likutei Devarim. I'm going to read it in Hebrew. The original is in Yiddish, also in the footnote. Halichato lebeit ha'asurim bivadai ha'ita l'shem kavan pnimius ba'avodas Hashem. And Likutei Devarim, written by the Frierdiker Rebbe, that his going into the prison specifically was for the purpose of the inner intention of avodas Hashem. V'kiyadua shel acharei yom Yud Tes Kislev hitchil be'ikar inyan yefutzu meinecha chutza hislafshus elikus behasaga. So it's known that after Yud Tes Kislev, this began the beginning of yefutzu meinecha chutza, your wellspring shall set forth. This idea that Elokus could be understood in human comprehension, because really Elokus is beyond us, and godliness is beyond what we should be able to understand. And the fact that we are able to grasp some concepts through the learning of Hasidus is really a gift. And that anybody can understand this through intellectual pursuits is really a miracle in and of itself. V'kenhu be'inyan Hashpa Yutes Kislev Shel Umasa Eilam. Shaharei Hamlucha Shemasara Havi Liadei Kach Sheshmo Niskadel V'Niskadesh Ve'inei Kol Hasarim Banu Vamru Alzot Ki'i Me'es Hashem Haitazot Hi Nifla Be'einenu. And what's incredible about the story of Yutes Kislev is that the non-Jewish guards of the prison, they came to a recognition of the greatness and the holiness of the Alter Rebbe, and they were able to say, this is all from Hashem, it's wondrous in our eyes. They were able to come to recognition. Not just we understand that, but the guards. And it's through these Gentile guards that they gave him the freedom and the ability to have the freedom in order to publicize and to teach Pnimius HaTorah, the inner intention of Torah and Torah HaChasidus. So Seif Gimel. Afa Pechen Adayin Hadavar Mechaber Lagamre. So the Rebbe says, so far we haven't fully clarified the connection between Yutes Kislev and Vayeshev. Sof beparshas Vayeshev ha'inyan hamidubar begali hu yeridas Yosef l'Mitzrayim chulo alu hamso bevesa soar. So ultimately, our parsha Vayeshev is Yosef going down to Mitzrayim and ending up in jail. As the verses that I read to you earlier about him telling his brothers, it was Hashem who sent me here and he sent me with a purpose, those are actually from Parshas Vayigash, which is in 2 weeks from now, not next week's parsha, the one after. So, but our parsha doesn't actually include that. Our parsha simply includes him going down and getting in jail. Be'elo inyan hatov ve'hatoeles shenigram ketota mehoredes Yosef l'Mitzrayim miskala mesupar rak la'acharichan. And again, all the good stuff and the purpose for him going down and the ultimate rise in power is going to be told to us later. Beparshios haTorah habao shalok inyan hakuula sheira bepol b'yutes Kislev, and in the coming parshas, and it doesn't seem to be directly connected to this idea of geula, of liberation, like we have in the story of Yutes Kislev. B'tzarich lomar shagam beparshaseinu nimsa inyan b'toichin shagula. Therefore, we're compelled to say that there must be a teaching of geula in this week's parsha as well. The yuvam behektem habior b'divrei hamidrash hanal. Okay, so now we're going to go back to that medrash that we heard about, the beginning of the medrash. B'divrei chazal she'inyan kibshon nirmez belashon Yosef hurad Mitzrayma. That the concept of conquering is hinted to in the words Yosef hored Mitzrayma. Yosef went down to Mitzrayim. Gufa heichma das amar vayered miyam ad yam. As it says, and he went down and he reigned from sea to sea, as you saw the pasuk in Tehillim. Muvan shalozo bilvad shiridas Yosef l'Mitzrayim hovila achar kach lekivshon lehitmanaso shel Yosef l'Mishna melech shal yidei zeh nasa l'shalit al Mitzrayim b'poel. So it's not just saying that the descent of Yosef into Mitzrayim after the fact will bring him to a conquering, meaning he's going to be second to the king and he's going to rule over Egypt practically. And it's not just saying this was the purpose, shehored Mitzrayma, of going down into Mitzrayim, ela yetera mizo, but even more so. Shnei ha'inyanim kolalim b'teva echad hored. These two ideas are incorporated, are connected, are inter-included in one word, in the word hored. Hored milashon yerida, hored related to the word yerida, descent, milashon vayered, roda shlita, and related to the word roda as in shlita, as in ruler. Hainus yached im hayerida atzma. Beshas Maisa, Kvar Niskayam Vayred, Roda Kivshon. So they're all connected in one word. The word itself, that it means two things. It means the descent and the rulership, the conquering. Even though they're opposite ideas. Gam sarich lahavin lahalam b'midrasham huva peiros Yosef al Yosef hored Mitzrayma, hored tashchina kivyachol leMitzrayim imo, so in the same medrash, we learn another idea, that Yosef brought down the Shekhinah with him, as it says that Hashem was with Yosef. As is known that there are many interpretations, sometimes on one word. And when that happens, they have a connection one to the next. Ve'im kan tzarich lomar shegam perish zeh kasher leperish hukam shel hored kivshon. So therefore, we have to say that this idea that Yosef brought the Shekhinah down with him, he brought Hashem's presence down with him, is connected to this same idea of going down and rulership that are all tied into the same word. V'yesh lomar habior b'zeh. So, as Rivki likes to say, in the Rebbe's modesty, v'yesh lomar, and one could say, the explanation is as follows. V'begeula ufida megalas yesh shlosh ofanim. There are three ways, there are three concepts in Geula, because we also have these three interpretations from the Medrash. Pedia b'derech milchama be'iyuv be'oyev al lehiskabrus alav be'lenitzachon. So there's freedom that comes through war, a war with an enemy until you overtake them and you win. So as we're reading, I mean, it was hard for me not to just make associations with the war in Gaza and everything that we heard about with the Israeli soldiers, like hand-to-hand combat, like literally going into tunnels and fighting soldiers. But again, trying to be careful, that was just my own thinking. Geula uptia zo ena mushlemet. And this is not a complete and total geula. Ki yesh sorech lehishtamesh b'mayan al kol panim klei hazaken b'tachlisei hamilchama b'chulo shel oyev. Because we have to deal with weapons and we have to get involved with like a hand-to-hand battle with the army. Arasher dam lerov shvachas, until the point of actually having to spill blood. V'zehu karav milashan hiskravus ze el zechulo. And this is related to coming close, meaning coming close to the enemy, like hand-to-hand combat. Uvelashon chasidus, and in the way of chasidus, haloichem mashpil atzmo letoch levushe hamisparer, that the fighter has to go into the turf of the enemy, kedei lilchombo, in order to fight him. Ba'azei nirgemet behechrach yerida, and therefore it requires a yerida, descent. Kol miluvushe egalusa, and his clothing becomes dirty. V'mimela gam la'achar hanitzachon v'hagula adayin ein zo geula mushlemet v'nishar haroshem she'agalti v'chulo. And even after they win, it's not a complete geula because their clothes, and metaphorically as well, remain dirty. They're stained. There's I guess we could say consequences. Ofen nale yoter shel ha'geula pedia b'shalom, but that's a higher level. So that's our first level, hand-to-hand combat. It's going to stay in the uniform. We have to go into the enemy turf. But now there's a higher level. There's ofen nale yoter shel ha'geula pedia b'shalom, pedia b'shalom. As we know, the niggin for Yitzhak Kislev, pada b'shalom nafshi. So pedia, freedom with shalom, freedom with peace. So this is a greater and a higher level. I'm bringing the pasuk that the soldiers of Edom were fearful. Basically, that the soldiers come, they see how strong the Jewish people are, and there's a tremendous fear, almost like an automatic surrender. And they're completely overwhelmed by the army completely overwhelms their enemies, and they don't even have to come close to them. They don't even have to fight combat with them. And in our service of Hashem, the dugmaso bavoda inyan hatayra she'ena mislabeshes ba'olam ella halo kol davar ka'esh ma esh anu mekalim tuma af divrei Torah ein mekablim tuma. And for an example, in our service of Hashem, this is like pure spirituality, that it doesn't engage in the world whatsoever, meaning that the words of Torah are like fire, and a fire cannot embody tuma, impurity, and so the words of Torah cannot become impure, meaning it sort of stands apart. Like the Torah, the purity overwhelms everything. There's no resistance to it. And so too in war, when the purity or the greatness of the army overwhelms the enemy, there's no fight, excuse me. So I did go through this with my husband and I said, maybe that's like 1967. And he said that I had that thought also, but not really, because there was a fight. But maybe at least we can use that as a point of just imagination of what it might mean, that an enemy is completely just overwhelmed and they don't actually fight. אך גם באופן זה של פתיעה הנה אלופי אדום נשארו בתקופם במקומם, ייתכן שאחר כך יתקם ולאום מלום יאמץ שכזה. So the thing is that this is not the highest level because a nation can rise up again and it can happen again. So even though in this generation, as it's talking about with Edom from the Pasuk, they were completely overwhelmed, they surrendered, but it doesn't mean that there's never going to be conflict again. It just means that at this moment in time, the purity, the holiness overwhelms. But there's still a possibility for at a later point in time that they'll rise up again. So even though in this level 2, the person is standing in a complete geula, but it doesn't mean that there's absolutely no space for gullus or for an enemy. But it's just that when there's still the possibility that gullus, that even though there's no gullus in the moment, there's no enemy in the moment, there's still a possibility that it could rise again. But there's another level, there's a third level. So the first level was hand-to-hand combat. The second level is a complete overwhelm of the enemy. But here's the third level. Ha'ofen hanala beyoter hu asher afal pi shina yirida lemekova b'nyaso shel haminaged ad kedei hitlafshu b'tocha makom lo zo bilvad she'ein ze be'ofen shagalus goremes le'ega'alti Yerida Amitis, Ela Adraba, Hagalus Gufan Hafechas Lamatzav Shel Geula. That the Gullus itself completely and totally transforms to the Geula. So even though you are, even though the person had to go down to another nation that they're fighting against, so much so that they're engaged and they're within the Gullus, but nonetheless, they themselves, it does lozo bilvad she'ein be'ofen shagalus go remes lis galti. So it's not saying that the gullus is the cause of the getting dirty of being stained, but it's a true yurida. It's that the gullus transforms into a geula, and it's a complete and total geula. Ve'ein hi mutira netinas makom lemenaged v'legalus, and it leaves no space for any enemy to exist or any or for the gullus to come back. It's a complete and total gullus. It's a complete transformation. So it's not an overwhelm, it's a transformation. I hope that makes sense, or I hope that's clear. V'zeu perish hapasuk pada b'shalom nafshi, and this is the third level. This is the understanding of the pasuk. My soul, my nafshi was redeemed complete in shalom mikrav li, from within. Sha'afal pi sheishno matzav shel mikrav li, matzav shel milchama haba be'ofen shel hislavshus begalus bekol zot hapetia hi be'ofen shel shalom. So even though there was a war and you were sort of hislavshi, you were engaged in the galus, within all this, the redemption was in a way of shalom, of completeness. Ki pedia zo ba mimadrega she'ein ba geder shel galus klal. Because this freedom, this pedia, comes from a place where there was no framework whatsoever of galus. Lechen hi po'ela shel galus gufa tapoch le'inyon shel geula. And it acts upon that the galus itself should be transformed to the geula. And we're gonna unpack this a little bit more. So if it sounds like theoretical ideas, I think that it'll get clarified what the distinction is between the transformation versus the overwhelm. Shalosh ofanim elu haya geuli mat'imim gam l'shloshes ofanei ha'avoda hashvatim ha'avos and Yosef. So these three ideas are seen in the avoda, in the service, in the way of the shvatim, the avos, and Yosef. So I know I do like making charts, and this I didn't, but this sikha would have been a very beautiful chart, because we have our three interpretations of the Medrash, we have our three understandings of how to fight the Gullus, and now we have a three service of Hashem as it lines up with the shvatim, the avos, and Yosef. Hashvatim hayu ra'ui tzayin, hayu gam besada v'hisbonenus muvdalim min ha'olam. Kedei she'inyanei ha'olam lo yitridu otam v'yir rif'um midbakos be'elikos. So the tribes, the Shvatim, as we know, they were shepherds. Oh, okay, I'm in Seif Hay. Thank you, Khani. I just started Seif Hay. So these three ways of serving Hashem are seen in the Shvatim, the Avos and Yosef. The Shvatim were shepherds, which, as you think of the work of a shepherd, they have a lot of solitude hours standing by themselves in the fields. And they had a lot of meditation, and they separated themselves from the world, so that the matters of the world shouldn't bother them and shouldn't take them away from their connection to Hashem. So on a deeper level, the Pnimius HaInyanim, the Madregas HaShvatim, Merkava Tata. So on a deeper level, the level of the Shvatim was a Merkava Tata, a lower level chariot. Yesh Tfesas Makom La'olam. There was space for the world. V'lachen, Elu hayu yordim v'misaskim v'inyanei ha'olam. Lo hayu yicholim l'hishaer b'madregas b'dvekos b'elikus b'ofen shel merkava. And therefore, when they went out and they did engage in business and matters of the world, they weren't able to be completely connected to Hashem like a chariot. They were able to be when they were off in the fields, when they were in their spiritual world, when they were doing meditation, but when they had to engage in business matters and the ways of the world, they were not. But the next level, Bidargas Avos, Merkavash Aliyah, the level of the Avos, a higher level chariot. So just to go back, if we were doing a chart, this level of the Shvatim would relate to Yerida, the going down, and it would relate to the Pada, the redemption that comes through fighting hand-to-hand combat. But now we have the second level, the level of the Avos, which is going to relate to the level of Hored Milashon Kibshon, the level of being a conqueror. The word Hored meaning to reign over the Mitzrayim. The level of the Avos, Merkava Ilah, a higher level chariot. And this is the level again of overwhelming the enemy. Hina af be'et ham matzam be'olam, ein hem hitlav shus be'olam. So even when they existed within the world, they were never of the world. They were never engaged. Not engaged is the wrong word. They were never enclosed in the world itself. They were always above. And therefore, worldly matters didn't bother them or disturb them in any way. And it didn't bother their connection to Hashem in any way. Now the highest level, the level of Yosef, level of bringing the Shekhinah down, and the level of transforming the Gullus into Geula. Asher mitzad echad haya behislavshus beinyanei ha'olam. So on one hand, he was totally engaged in worldly matters. Sharei b'yosef b'mitzrayim ha'talo tirda gedola v'tzuma yoter. As we know that he had a tremendous amount of work and difficulty when he went down to Mitzrayim. V'chol shechen v'kal v'chomer b'yosef melech al Mitzrayim. And how much more so when he was a king over Mitzrayim. Kamo shekatuv Al picha yishak chulo raka kisa. The only thing that was above him was the throne. Shemilado lo yarim ish chulo. That no man in Egypt raised his hand or raised his leg without his permission. Uvefrat bizman shabo hishbir bar lekol am haaretz shahita asko im kol ha'olam cholo. And so much so, he was so engaged, he was so involved in the worldly matters that he provided grain to all the nations of the world. He was engaged in all the material matters of the world. Bar means grain. When I was reading this reading through it earlier on Shabbos, I said to my 10-year-old son, what does bar mean? And he said it means simcha, like bar mitzvah. So I kind of knew that wasn't right at the time, but I thought that was cute to share. But yes, it means grain. It doesn't mean simcha. Ba'af lifneichen, and even before this, ma'az yiridaso lemitzrayim, even when he went down to Mitzrayim, hina beyoso eved shel Potiphar, Sar Hatzvachim, and he was the servant of Potiphar, who was the head slaughterer, the head butcher, I guess. Hayatored Ba'oske Potiphar. He was engaged in all of the dealings of Potiphar's house. And even after that, he's imprisoned, he's put in jail. Hare Vaiten Sar Beisasor Biyad Yosef. As kol ha'asirim asher v'esasor as kol asher osim sham hu haya oseh. So the fate and the management of all the prisoners in the jail was put into Yosef's hands, and everything that was done in the jail, he did. And even all of these difficulties and all of these practical issues that he had to manage, it didn't bother his connection to Hashem. And even from within them, from the midst of all these responsibilities, he was a chariot literally to godliness. He was completely and totally connected to Hashem. V'tam hadavar ki he'ir bo ha'or ha'eloki ha'naila legamre mina olam. And the reason for this is because it was evident, it was seen from within him, the godly light that is greater than this world. V'metzad or zeh lo yitachen lomar afilu shalom eno tofes makom. And in terms of this light, you can't even say the world doesn't take up any space. Don't pay attention to it. Don't mind all the practical side of things. There's nothing to even talk about. You can't even go there. You can't even give it enough recognition to write it off. And therefore, because he was so above that, he was able to exist within the world. And therefore, it didn't confuse or disturb or bother his connection to Hashem. Hadvekus be'elakus morgeshes gam be'inyanei ha'olam shebehem ha'adam ha'oved miluvash. And his connection to Hashem was felt even within the worldly matters that he was engaged in. V'kach b'toich ha'olam gufa nikeret u'mergeshes ha'elakus shelamayla megerer ha'olam. And therefore, from b'toich, it's highlighted, from within the world itself, it was recognized the godliness that is from above this world. Uchamo shematzinu beYosef, shebehayoto eved Potiphar. And as we see with Yosef, when he was a slave to Potiphar, Vayar Adanav ki Hashem ito v'kol asher hu aseh Hashem matzliach b'yado. That Potiphar, again, the non-Jewish master, saw that Hashem was with him, and everything that he did, he was successful. Be'oto makom shebo Potiphar hu Adanav, hina sham gufa ra'ah Adanav. So on the one hand, Potiphar is his master. On the other hand, he sees that the master, Hashem, is with him at all times. V'gam lachar mechanin, and then next, to the next stage, even after this, Biyoto asir b'beis asor, when he's in jail, when he's in prison. Vayhi Hashem es Yosef, vayet elav chesed, vayiten chano b'nei ksar beis asor. Hashem is with Yosef, and Hashem does him a favor, so to speak, and he makes him look good in the eyes of the head of the prison. Afilu sar beis asar shebo haya Yosef asir chash bezo. So even the master, the ruler of the prison, who himself is imprisoning Yosef, who Yosef is a prisoner, he recognizes this. He sees this. He sees this godliness, this greatness of Yosef. Seif Zayin. Al pi hanal yuvno gam divrei hamedrash al Yosef hared Mitzrayim. Kivshon vayred miyam ad yam. So according to this understanding, now we can really understand what the Medrash is saying, that Yosef hurad, I'm going to use the Hebrew word, went down / ruled Mitzrayim, and the Medrash says it means kivshon, to conquer, and he ruled like in Tehillim, and he ruled from sea to sea. And we can understand the connection to the concept that he brought the Shekhinah, the presence of God, with him. Sorry, this is Seif Vav. I said Zayin, and I'm sorry if I said the wrong one before. I thought I said Vav before. I hope I said hey before. I just started Vav, and it's a short one. Kasher Yosef harid Mitzrayim kipshuto v'ken beruchnias k'shaita lo yerida v'hislavshus b'Mitzrayim hina sham b'hiyota v'yiridas nishar b'mehuso ha'elakus harida tashchina no v'yirida ze gufa niskema bo kivshon. So when Yosef went down to Mitzrayim, also spiritually, it was that he was this that this descent, he was engaged within Mitzrayim, but he also at the same time retained his godliness, his godly essence, his godly identity. As it says, he brought the Shekhinah down with him. And so that this Yerida, it was very much a conquering. Ki kasher Yosef magia leMitzrayim, because when Yosef got to Mitzrayim, Zagufa Mishnah esem huso shel Mitzrayim, this actually changed Egypt itself. Kach shagam b'makom zeh shel Mitzrayim nikered b'mgeshes elukus, because what happened was when Yosef came down to Mitzrayim, within Mitzrayim itself, you could sense godliness. Davar zeh naisa miyad b'tchias horada v'kanal. And this was seen from the beginning of his descent, miyad, immediately, as explains above. Vayar Adanav ki Hashem ito, as his master, his slave master, saw that Hashem was with him, that God was with him. And therefore he elevated him to the head of his house. And every single thing that was within his house was in the hands of Yosef. And so too, this is the same dynamic that played itself again when he was in prison. Asher Yosef Hored Mitzrayim Perush V'inyano Kivshon Heichma Das Amar Virad Miyam Pulu. And the Gemara explains that when Yosef went down to Mitzrayim, it means that the ruler, it says Kivshon Heichma Das, rulership. Why does it say it? Amar Virad Miyam, to mean ruled from sea to sea. Same idea that the Rebbe is bringing us, a quote from the Gemara. Steve Zion. I'm sorry if I messed up the Seifs before. I'm looking at a different version, so. So now let's get back to Yotes Kislev, and this idea relates again to the imprisonment of the Alter Rebbe. Rabbeinu Hazaken v'yoto b'beisa asurim haya b'hislavshus b'galas hu himtik et hadinim b'ha'averet hayad al hametzach v'al hapanim. So when the Alter Rebbe was in prison and he was totally involved in the gullus, he sweetened the he did not sweeten the dinim, the punishment, or what was about to happen to him. As it says in he could have like wiped past his hand over his forehead, and he could have just created a miracle that he wouldn't have been imprisoned. Because we're going to talk about some of the miracles that the Alter Rebbe did do. Hu lo garam l'kach makom shmasrum mivsar tainis Soviet yisraf. He didn't just put his hand over his forehead and cause that the prison, which was called Tainis Soviet, would burn. V'ofen hanhaga imo haya shechakruhu bechakira v'drisha v'ribui shalos al yesodis hatorah v'mitzvos. But rather, what happened was he was interrogated deeply and interrogated cruelly with many, many questions about the foundation of Torah and mitzvahs. V'hu yeshiva lehem, and he answered them. V'hasbara arucha, with long answers. V'oifen shagam hamoichos hameshugim shel menale hadrisha v'hachakira hayu l'cholim lehavin. And he answered them in a way that the grub minds of these nasty rulers that were imprisoning him, the jailers, could understand. So here you have that a master Rebbe that could perform miracles. Instead of making it like the prison should burn down, he's engaging within exactly what's going on, and he's answering the questions in fully almost like lowering himself, so to speak, to explain a way that a most basic mind could understand. On the other hand, he wasn't forced to do this. Kimisupar al yidei chak mori v'chami admor, as the Frierdiker Rebbe explains, shekol inyan ha'maiser haya behaskamato shel Rabbeinu Hagadol, that everything that happens to the Alter Rebbe was according to his own agreement. Ilula haya harabi maskim lo haya osrimato, and if the Rebbe didn't agree to this, he wouldn't have been imprisoned. And what's the proof? B'hara'iyah lekach hi mahanasiya lePetersburg. From the trip to Petersburg itself comes the proof. The Erev Shabbos na'atzra hamerkava hashchayra. On Friday afternoon, the black, I think it's called Black Mary, the black carriage stopped. Veloho ila arba susim she nitramu kedei lahasia. And the four horses refused to go. Mishum sheharabi lo chafetz bechach, because the Rebbe didn't want to travel on Shabbos. Klalos inyan hamaiser hayak inyan helbasha biratzon shaloli shamesh b'derech l'mayla min hateva. However, the reason for the imprisonment was because the Alter Rebbe did not want to act in a way of miracles and act in a way that was above nature. V'yadua shehalvasha v'hagbala biratzon eina hagbala amiti. And he knew that this was not a true boundary. Hagbala amiti hi dafka hagbala habala adam behechrach. So what is a true hagbala, true boundary? When something's forced upon a person. Medavar shechutz himenu, from outside. Ach kasheofen hagbala hu hamukbal hu shegbilat atzmo, hare hadavar telui bo. But when the boundary, when the limitation is something that a person places upon themselves from within them, so then that boundary, that limitation is dependent on the person themselves. It's not forced upon them, it's from within them. It's their own decision. The hatam sheshnei katzot elu haya yecholim lishchon etzlo yachtav. Move on to Divrei Rabotenu Liseu ki Rabbeinu Hazaken hu atzmi, the etzel atzmi ein makom l'shinu zman v'makom. And the reason that these two things could kind of go at the same time, that he's imprisoned, but it's from within him. It's his own choice to allow this to happen. It's because the Rabbeinu Hazaken is an atzmi. And an atzmi is not affected by time and place. He's a higher level soul. There's a footnote to Likutei Devarim here. Obviously, you could probably bring on this concept a long time, but we'll leave that. V'lafichach gam b'hiyoto b'maiser b'ofen shel hislafyus kevyachol pa'al v'hashpia al sarei hamlucha atzmam shehem mitzad hametzius shelahem yotziu lecheres b'ofen shel pada v'shalom mitoch hakara shehu ish eloki. And this had an impact upon the jailers, upon the soldiers that are keeping him in prison themselves. He had an impact on the sarei hamlucha, the government officials, that they let him out from their own recognition that he was a godly man. He didn't have to sneak out through a tunnel. He didn't have to be fought. He didn't have to fight his way out. They came from their own understanding to a full recognition of him as a godly man. And the Alter Rebbe writes about this in his letter, Hamiforsemet, well-known Odos Geula. Hefli Hashem v'higbil lasot be'eretz asher niskadel v'niskadesh b'rabim v'v'frat b'nei kol hasarim v'kol ha'amim asher b'kol medinas hamelach asher gam b'neihem yafli hadavar hapela v'pela v'anu v'amru al zot ki im be'es Hashem ha'ita zos hi nifla b'einenu. So that is a quote from the letter that the Alter Rebbe wrote, just a rough translation. Hashem made wonders and incredible things happen, exalted in public in front of all the ministers and Gentiles, hope and wonder in their eyes. And they said it's wondrous and miracle. Shebayoto tachat mishlamtam berushusam re'ui hasarim ba'af hamelach atzmo shehu chacham gadol v'ish Eloki. And as we said, that the ministers, the government agencies themselves, and the king himself, they saw that he was a chacham gadol, a great wise person and a godly man. Hakarazo, and this recognition, shavhem hikiru Kima Eis Hashem Hayatazos, that even they, these non-spiritual enemies, so to speak, that they recognized the greatness of Hashem. Mitvatet hachidush shel geulas Yud Kislev. This is the novelty, the greatness, the uniqueness of Yud Kislev. Bidugmas Yeridas Yosef. This is very similar, or the Rebbe says bidugmas, like an example like of the Yeridas Yosef, the going down / the rulership of Yosef. Shema shehured gufa hi ba'ofen shel vayared kivshon. That the word hurad, which could mean to go down, is the same exact word as the word yored, which means to reign and to conquer. So that's I would say probably segment 1 of the Sikha, and I will, I don't know, fair for me to make it into segments, but we'll go to another level. But that explains on the straightforward level the connection between Vayeshev and Yutes Kislev. Let's now go to Seif Ches. Kol inyan mispa'er v'miskala al yedei Torah or ba'al derech b'nidin didan ha'pa'ula v'chidish b'masro v'begula so Rabbeinu Hazaken kushurim l'chidish b'tayraso. So everything that we've explained according to Torah or and according to our example, the novel understanding of the imprisonment and the release and the geula of the Alter Rebbe is also connected to a chiddush, a new way in the Alter Rebbe's Torah. Ubifrat beSifro HaTanya, as is specifically in the Tanya, ki yadua geulas yud tes kislev ba b'schus shtei shenot chayvot b'Torah v'avoda shesefer Tanya husif lechasidim. As is known that Yud Tes Kislev was the Rosh Hashanah for Chassidus. That's the, spiritually speaking, it was the release of the Tanya, the Sefer Chassidus. V'mitam zeh chafetz Rabbeinu Zaken shesefer Tanya yadua lifnei Yud Tes Kislev. And that's why the Alter Rebbe wanted that it should be printed before Yud Tes Kislev. The Habior, and the explanation is the Sefer Tanya Kadisha, in the holy Sefer Tanya, Kifi Shehu Lefanenu, as we have it, Mofia Shar Yichad Ve'amuna Kechelek Sheni. That the section of Tanya called Shar Yichad Ve'amuna comes second. Ach Yadua Kimisupar Bifnei Chasidim. Rabbeinu Hazaken svara likboa et shar hayichad ve'amuna kechelek harishon. However, is known amongst Chasidim that there was a thought that the Alter Rebbe had that Sefer of Shar Yichad ve'amuna should actually come first. The Mai Taima dimsas bechinuch katan, and what is the reason for this? As explained in the chinuch katan, which is the hakdama l'Shar Yichad ve'amuna, the intro to Shar Yichad ve'amuna, Beis or Gimel Ba'amim. Halashon kamosh yispire, but lashon atid. Okay, so normally when we would talk about a text that was already quoted, we would say kamosh nispaer, as it was said in past tense. However, here many times it says kamosh yispaer, as will be quoted. So Shar Yichud Ve'amuna comes second. So really, anything that it's going to talk about referencing the first section should be in the past tense, as was previously explained. However, in the introduction, many things are written in the future tense, as will be explained with regard to something from the first section, Lakutei Amarim. I hope that made sense. So, so even though it is talking about ideas that have already been explained in the first section of Tanya, the introduction sometimes uses the future sense as if it's going to be explained later. Yetzer al ken, kevan Rabbeinu Hazaken hishiras halashon kamo sheyispire b'makom avelo shniyazo lenispaer b'lashon avar harezo hochacha she'af shelachar sheRabbeinu Hazaken hachlit sheshar hayichad b'nua yofia la'achar chelek harishon. Adayin hotir netinas makom l'sfaras hakodemet ubishar hayichad b'muna yeshno inyan shel mekaimo hu berishona ach lo rov hanyan shabo. So the fact that the Alter Rebbe did not change the language, he kept the wrong sort of mistaken tense, so to speak. He kept future tense in the intro to Shar Yichad b'muna. When it's talking about the idea, it says the ideas which will come, even though it's actually referring to ideas we already learned before, is because he wanted to give space. That's the direct translation, the sinas makom. He wanted to give us the space, the understanding that there is a thought process, there is a legitimate school of thought to say that Shar Yichud B'Emunah should come first. Ultimately, it comes second. But the Alter Rebbe wants us not to forget that there was a legitimate reason why one would think it should come first. And this is let's go a little deeper. Why? Because the service of a person is in order for us to get to a level of ava and yira, of love and fear and awe of Hashem, which is really the content of the first section of Tanya, Likutei Amarim, First, we have to have this emuna, this deep faith in the oneness and the completeness of Hashem, which is really what Shar Yichud V'Emunah deals with. As mentioned in the end of the introduction, Chinuch Katan. So we have the content of Likutei Amarim. The first section is really Avan Yira, and the content of the second section is the oneness and the complete unity of God. And because it's kind of going to be like this, you really need both. But because in order for the Avan Yira to have a foundation, you do need this deep belief in Hashem, the oneness and the greatness of Hashem, which is why there was a thought to put that first. Ultimately, that wasn't what was kept, but the Alter Rebbe, again, he hints to that by having the tense, the wrong tense, the future tense in the intro to the second section, when it really should be past tense. This is what was already mentioned, because he wants you to know that there really is a legitimate reason why that should have come first. ועל פי זה יש לומר שעניין המייסר והגולה של רבנו הזקן מסגלה במספר בתניא, בתורתו של רבנו הזקן, בעיקר בשער הייחוד ואמונה. And according to this, understand this line of thinking, the whole idea of the imprisonment of the Alter Rebbe is explained the deepest, the most thoroughly, the most significantly in the section of Tanya called Shar Yichud V'Emunah, the second section. Seif tests. בין עיקרי העניינים שרבנו הזקן מבאר ומחדש בשער הייחוד ואמונה, יש לכאורה שתי נקודות כלליות. Okay, so what is this? What's in Shar Yichud Ve'Emunah? So in the main ideas that the Alter Rebbe explains in Shar Yichud Ve'Emunah, there are two general concepts. Aleph, habir be'perish Abal Shem Tov al ha'pasuk la'olam Hashem devar nitzav b'shamayim. Forever, eternally, the word of Hashem stands in the Shemayim, is the pasuk, and the Baal Shem Tov has unique understanding of this pasuk. Shed dvar shameret yehi rakia tevos ve'otios elo hen nitzavos ve'omdos la'olam b'toch rakia hashamayim lahachayosem. That these actual words of the 10 utterances that Hashem used when he created the world, yehi rakia, etc., these actual words stand within the heavens, within the rakia, and they enliven them. Ilu haya ha'otios mistalkot kerega chas v'shalom ve'chozer l'mekayran. So if these words, these letters would depart, God forbid, and return to their source, hayu kol hashamayim ayin ve'efes mamish. The entire heavens would be nothingness. Hayu kilo haya klal. Not only would they cease to exist presently or in the future, they would cease to exist in the past. It would be as if they never existed whatsoever. Kimo lifnei shesha shemei breshis mamish, like before the 6 days of creation entirely. V'mizem muvan eich she kol nivra ve'yesh hu be'emet nischashev la'ayin be'efes mamish lagabe kayach hapoel. So according to this, we can understand how all of creation feels itself to be utterly nothing with regard to Hashem. And if the spirit of Hashem, if the ruach piv, I don't know the best way to translate, that enlivens it, would depart at any second and any time, whatever the creation is, us, any creation, would become absolute nothingness instantly. Maybe this is an oversimplification, but maybe you could think like a puppet. If you're just going to take the hand out, there's zero existence there. But that's probably a pretty big oversimplification. So that's one main idea of Shar Yichud Ve'Emunah. Here's another one. Beis shehat simsun einenu kipshuto. שהקדוש ברוך הוא סילק עצמו במהותו חס ושלום מהעולם הזה, רק שמשגיח מלמעלה בהשגחה פרטית על כל היצורים כולם אשר בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת. And the other idea is that the simsum means contraction, that Hashem sort of contracting himself and making him smaller is not literal. And that when we say that Hashem removed himself, and you might think that Hashem made himself smaller in these areas and removed himself from the world, and he's just Mashgiach, he just sort of overlooks from above. V'yesh lomar shabir inyan zeh shetzimtzum eno kipshuto eno inyan bifnei atzo elo hu ba behemsel v'kesher lebir chiddush habal shem tov kiddush lekamen. So you could say that this idea that the tzimtzum is not literal, meaning it's not that Hashem is actually smaller within a rock than within or than in something else. Is that Hashem is fully and completely present in every single creation. It's not that he literally makes himself smaller. That idea is directly connected to the first idea that the letters of the words of the utterances of Hashem stand at all times in Shemayim. If Tzimtzum was literal, it would mean that Hashem is not found in certain places. And the Alter Rebbe is saying it's not literal. And therefore, it's a direct continuation of the Chiddush of the Baal Shem Tov, that those words, the 10 utterances, stand at all times within the heavens. Sif Yud, Chiddush beperish Baal Shem Tov, Eno rak shedavar Hashem muchach lehavot tamid kol nivra. So the Chiddush, the novel teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, is not just that the words of Hashem are necessary, are required in order to enliven every creation, the kol rega v'rega, each moment after moment. Ela gam shetevos yehi rakia gover hen miluvashas b'toch kol harikim la'olam lechachayosem. Not just that the words themselves, in some spiritual capacity, enliven us, but also that they, and it's emphasized, hislavshus b'toch, they are enclosed within all the heavens, in order to enliven them. And so too, this concept within all creations. So the words and the letters that enliven every single creation, they are enclosed within them. In the bracket, Kefi Shemarich Rabbeinu Hazaken Shebekol Nivra Yesh Bechinos Nefesh Bechayas Ruchnias. That, as the Alter Rebbe continues to explain, that every single creation has a spiritual and a physical existence. Ki afilu hanivran she'enam muskarim basara maimaro shevatayra. Even the objects, the creations that are not mentioned specifically within the Torah. V'nimsheches aleim chayos hayuredes v'mishtalshalos b'madrega l'madrega ma'aseres ha'maimaro shevatayra. They al yedei chalufim v'tamurim hayeses v'gematrias ad shechol lehitzamzem lislavesh lehishavos mimenu nivra prati. So this explains in Tanya that while it does mention certain things in the 10 utterances, many things in the world that exist are not mentioned specifically. However, they're hinted to and derived from all sorts of letter transmutations and gematrias and combinations of letters that you can get to the existence of every single object within this world is existing because and via the 10 utterances that Hashem made at the time of creation. The example given in Tanya is of a rock. The word even is not within 10 utterances, but it nonetheless can be achieved, can be understood through, as it says, letter transmutations and gematrias and all sorts of Kabbalistic ideas that are beyond the pale. And there's lots and lots, we're not going to go through it, but there's lots of footnotes on this section of the Sikha, as this is a very, very deep, lots of very deep ideas here. Kilomar ein perish advarim devar Hashem mahave tamid as hanivra ve'elo nivra hu davar nifrad mimenu. So this does not mean that Hashem enlivens an object, and that object is nifrad, is separate, it's its own thing. Ela shedavar Hashem meluvash b'toich hanivra gufa. But rather that the word of Hashem is enclosed within the creation itself. The makomo shel hanivra, in the place of the nivra, of the creation. Ad shechiyuto v'nafshu shel kol nivra v'nevra hi dvar Hashem hamuluvash vo. Up to the point that the vitality and the liveliness of each and every creation is the word of Hashem that is enlivening it. V'mimela muvan asher kol nivra v'yesh hu be'emes nichshav la'ayin be'efes mamish l'gabe koyach ha'poel v'ruach sheve'nafel hamahava oto tamid v'motzi ma'ayin mamish l'yesh. The entire life force is the word of Hashem, and it's not two separate things. it's not that Hashem enlivens, like I said something about a puppet. That would be like my hand makes the puppet go. No, it's the entire thing. It's one entity. ולפי זה נמצא לכאורה שהביטול של הנברא אינו ביטול בשלמותו. You might think that the bittul of the nullification of the creation is not complete. It's not completely given over. It's not completely nullified. Shechan kevan shachayas hamluveshes benivrim hi chayas umitsemes umugbelet. That the chayas, the vitality that's within each and every creation is bound, is limited. Lifi archo shel hanivra, according to the value of the nivra, meaning like you might, like a stone or something has less vitality than an animal. Canal. Hare hadavar noten makom lemitzius hayesh. But this would give a place for there to be existence outside of Hashem. And if there is existence outside of Hashem, that there's two separate entities, that A is controlling B, so then B has some sort of existence, even if it's completely and totally subdued to A, but it has some sort of existence outside of A. That's not the case. But according to what the Alter Rebbe teaches, that Tzimtzum eno kipshuto chas v'shalom, that the Tzimtzum is not literal, God forbid, that Hashem made himself smaller. It's not smaller. Dahainu shagam b'makom b'madrega shehu shaha'or b'chayas ha'elokis hamitztamsim b'mislabeshes b'toch hanivram kina leit atar pinu minei. But rather that there's no place devoid of Hashem, that every single aspect of creation is completely and totally filled with Hashem. V'mehusa v'asmuso yisparach male es kol ha'aretz mamish bizman u'mekaymo nimsha sheyesh kan shnei katzot. And that every single aspect of all of the world is completely and totally filled with Hashem. So within this, there are two ideas. L'chol nivra yesh nefesh v'chayas ruchnis. Every creation has a physical and a spiritual life. Pratis al yedei tzimtzum hislapshu shel davar Hashem. Through the tzimtzum, the contraction and the enclothing of the words of Hashem, the kol niver prati. V'yachad im zeh kashar kol niver v'niver latzmusa v'muso yisparach. So every creation has its individual davar Hashem, word of Hashem that's enlivening it. And at the same time, in connection to this, every single creation is connected to the essence of Hashem. So everyone has the individual and the whole and the general. Ki gam b'makaymo shel hanivra nimsa mehuso v'asmuso yisparach. Because even in the place, so to speak, of the nivra, of the creation, also exists the essence of Hashem. V'kevan shemehuso v'asmuso yisparach eno begeter ha'olam klal, and because the mehus and the atzmos, the identity, it's hard to translate these words probably, the identity and the essence of Hashem is not within the boundaries of the world at all. Hina mitzad zeh morgash mitziuto shalom gufa hi elokus. So in this capacity, we can understand that the entire existence of the world is nothing but godliness. It's a complete manifestation of Hashem. The lashon hayadua hayesh nivrahu hayesh amiti ein od milvado, or how we understand that the only yesh, the only existence that is true existence is Hashem, as the saying goes, ein od milvado. But we still have our individual existence, so we sort of have that duality. Yud Aleph, kol ha'inyanim she'b'Torah hem hora be'avedos kol echad be'echad. So we're not going to get away with these deep ideas without a lesson. All of the ideas in the Torah are a lesson for the service of each individual. Ubifrat inyanim she'ereu l'nasi b'Yisrael, and especially something that's going to happen to a leader of Israel, neshama klalis, a general soul. V'bao b'parsum v'miyuchad b'inyanenu, and it's something that was publicized and something that specific to us. Sherei klalos inyan hamaiser haya kasher l'mesiris nafshel shel Rabbeinu hazaken al Torah hachasidus leman kol Yisrael, that the imprisonment of the Alter Rebbe and that his Mesiras Nefesh, his self-sacrifice of the Alter Rebbe for Torah's HaChasidus for all the Jewish people, Kol Echad Ve'echad Yisrael, Yesh Lomar She'al Yedei Zeh, Patach Rabbeinu Hazaken et Hatzinor Shel Mesiras Nefesh Al Avodas Hashem B'Torah's HaChasidus. So through this mechanism, we could say that the Alter Rebbe opened up a pipeline of self-sacrifice that we all have for Torah, for the Torah's that we all have access to, this level of Mesiras Nefesh for Torah's HaChasidus. Avodaso shel kol Yehudi behimsato becheshkas hagalas sricha liot la'ir es cheshach hagalas al yedei avodaso bener mitzvah v'torah or b'frat b'zman ikva d'mashiach. So the service, what's incumbent upon each and every Jew that finds themselves in the dark gullus, it has to be in the way of lighting up the darkness through Torah and mitzvahs, especially in our generation at the heels of Mashiach. And in order to do that, to lighten up the darkness, like we have in this generation, a doubled over darkness, we need to have an extremely powerful light. And this is the light of the Torah, of the Pnimius Torah, the Torah of Chassidus, the inner dimension of Torah. Mitzad ha'chayshach hagadol ba'olam alulim lehisorer be'avoda kashim v'nisyonos kashim beyoter. So on one hand, because of the tremendous darkness in the world, we have to work even harder. Uveshaz chash hayehudi shelo zo bilvad Yisrael bechlal hem atem hamaat mikol amim. And a person feels distressed, and they feel that we're a small minority among nations. Elagam bein b'nei Yisrael gufa hulet and even within the Jews, so we're this small little nation, but what group of Jewish people from within the Jewish people are even engaged in hafatzas hayahadis, in spreading the wellsprings of Judaism? Ner mitzvah Torah or mitzvahs in Torah, b'fras v'hafatzas hamayanas chutza, and specifically in spreading the wellsprings of Torah. So I just want to, the Rebbe is differentiating here a little bit, or just like calling out two different ideas, hafatzas hayahadas and hafatzas hamayanas. So hafatzas hayahadas would be the Judaism, and hafatzas hamayanos is teachings of Chassidus, which obviously they come together, but they are maybe two separate ideas also. Aluchu labo lidei miskana, and a person might come to be a miskana, like a nevach, a pity case, or feel bad for themselves. Shemutov lo lahamtin ad sheyachlifu otam hakashim v'halamos v'hasterim, that they're going to wait until the tide changes, until it turns around, until all the darkness and the difficulties turn. V'lachar mikan yamshich b'avodaso, and then he'll continue his work. So, let's wait until the war ends, and then we'll continue. Al kach ba ha'amor la'ayil. And in order to negate that line of thinking comes the line from what we just learned. Alav ladat shaha'olam v'kol asher bo mishave v'kol rega v'rega ma'ayin v'efes hamuchlet mamish al yedei hakadosh baruch hu. You should know that the world is in existence. It's being enlivened and it's being existed, if that could be a verb, every single moment upon moment from complete nothingness through Hashem. Asher ein lo aliyah b'siba hakodemet chas v'shalom. It's nothing other than Hashem. Nothing other than Hashem exists. Uvechen harei lo yitachen klal shetiskayem mitzius she'ena menicha leyehudi lavod avodasa b'hafatzas ner mitzvah v'torah or u'b'hafatzas hamayanas chutza. There's nothing that can stop a person from continuing to serve Hashem in a way of spreading Torah and mitzvos and the teaching of Chassidus. And what about the person who sees all of the difficulties and the challenges in spreading Yiddishkeit? Alav ladat they have to know that the simsum is not literal, that Hashem did not literally make himself smaller, that there isn't space for something other than Hashem. Hashem is fully and totally present within each object, within each creation. Einza helem amisi. It's not a true helem. It's not a true disappearance or negation of godliness. The hakavana v'kachi sheyigala be'atzmo es hachelek elokam v'mal mamish. And the entire purpose is to reveal the essence that a person is a piece of Hashem from above, literally. As we know, the Alter Rebbe added the word mamish. Hamnimsa b'teicho v'es koichos shekiu v'hechniso bo ravosenu v'nisienu. And a person has within them the strengths that were planted within by the Rabbeinu Nasienu, by the leader, the Reb. Here we're talking about the Alter Rebbe. The Kaf Gitakem Bo Kivshon Vishalet Behon, and we have the ability to conquer. Behu Yechavesh Es HaInyanim HaMivalvolim B'Ma'alimim B'Mistarim V'Yishlet Bahem Gam B'Gilui V'Al-Yedei Avodas Kol Echad Be'echad Be'ofen Shel Kivshon B'Hafasas HaYehadus B'Arba Amos Shalo Kolal Hafatzas Hamaynos Chutza Mosif Kol Echad Umachish Espias HaMashiach Sidkenu. And a person can conquer all of the things in their life, in the world, that confuse them, that are difficult, that conceal godliness, and he can rule over them in an obvious way. And through this way, every single person has the ability to conquer in the spreading of Judaism to the four, like the Arba Omos Shalo, within everybody's 4 cubits, within your own circle of influence. And through this, that's kind of where you would start. And through this leads to Hafatzas Hamayanos Chutza, a greater sharing of the wellsprings of Torah. Mosif Kol Echad Machish Espias HaMashiach Sidkenu. And each person adds to this and brings closer the coming of Mashiach. Ba'az Yiru HaKol Begili Be'enei Basar, and it will be seen clearly and obviously through the human eye. Vayared miyam ad yam uminahar ad asfei aretz, that he rules over from sea to sea, and from the river to the end of the land. Va'af be'ofen shel malal haaretz dea es Hashem kimiyam liyam machzim, and there should be a recognition that Hashem fills the land from sea to sea. Ki az yakim hayeud v'nisgale kavod Hashem. Because will come the proclamation and the recognition and the revelation of the greatness of Hashem. Gam atahu malo kol haaretz kipshuto mamish aval ein ze bigili. So, but don't worry, even today, even right now, Hashem fills the entire land literally, completely in all ways. It's just not obvious. Aval az v'nigle kavod Hashem ru'u kol basar yachdav ki pada Hashem. Davar. However, in the future, the greatness and the glory of Hashem will be completely revealed, and everybody, all human eyes will be able to see the oneness and the completeness of the word of Hashem. Chaim.
Tzipah, amazing.